Hi everybody. I would like to start with something different today. So let me introduce myself using this application here. So my name is Eliasz. That works. I'm Eliasz Sawicki. And the title of today's presentation is ReSwift. So I think we can start right now. And sorry, that's a crash. But that's something that happens all the time, right? And it's always like disaster when you're going through a long flow and suddenly something happens and you just filled a long form with so many dates that you were like doing it for 2 minutes, and you can always do it like the way that you put, for example, some flags. And you simply go through your view controllers with some prepared data, but sometimes you just want to do it without all this additional work. And now simply I've just fixed the crash. That was a fatal error. So when you start an application, that will simply go to the place that I just left. And now when the crash is over, I can simply go to the main screen. But the title was actually a bit different, so let me fix it. It was time traveling with ReSwift. So yeah, right now I think that everything works. So that's something that we can do when we are using Redux architecture and ReSwift. So let me start the actual presentation and get to the part when I'm telling how it actually works. So as I said before, the title of the presentation is Time Traveling with ReSwift. So as you could see, my name is Eliasz Sawicki, and I'm iOS developer from Gdańsk. I work at Bright Inventions there. We craft some nice applications for our clients. I'm also blogging about what I do on eliaszsawicki.com, and I'm available on Twitter. So if you want to ping me, just feel free to do that. I'll be happy to answer your questions. And today's topic is ReSwift, time traveling with ReSwift. So the first thing that you do when you want to find out what certain framework is, you go to its GitHub page. So you can see here that ReSwift is a Redux-like implementation of unidirectional data flow architecture in Swift. So that might look confusing at the beginning because I think that for iOS developers it's the first time that you can see something like Redux when you're talking about ReSwift. So how many of you have heard of Redux before or have to work with that? Yeah, so not so many. So today I would like to go deeper into this description, and I will tell you what Redux is and what unidirectional data flow is. With this knowledge, it will be much easier for us to get into what ReSwift is, because it's based on the Redux architecture. So here's a quick plan for today. First of all, I will say how did it all start in my case, how did I get into Redux architecture, and why was I even interested in ReSwift? Because we all know there are so many frameworks that we want to test that it can be pretty confusing what to take first. So later I will tell you how this architecture works. How it works, so what you should know in order to work with this properly. And in the end, I will tell what are my thoughts about ReSwift and what I like about it, what I don't like about it, and what I think that you should remember about when you're working with this framework. So, do we sit comfortably right now? So let's imagine we're sitting near a fireplace. How did it all start? So we had a project in Bright Inventions. We were supposed to create a web panel for our client, and we were looking for technology that we could use to create that. And there are like every 2 weeks you have a new framework in JavaScript. So yeah, you have to be pretty picky at what you do. We decided to gather up and to look what we can do about it. We decided to take React. It's like when you have so many frameworks, we picked React, we thought it was good to create that application. And then when you're looking at this, React tutorials and you start reading about this, you see that Facebook, they encourage you to use the architecture that they use in order to create applications with React called Flux. And it's pretty good. I mean, you can read about it, and as soon as you start reading about Flux, you notice that some people say that oh, there is some interesting architecture called Redux. And you see that so many people are like buzzing about it. It's pretty common in those places. And what is Redux about? Because at the beginning it might seem pretty confusing. So the principle in Redux architecture is actually a unidirectional data flow. And what unidirectional data flow is? Because normally when we are working with iOS applications, we mostly hear about architectures like MVC. Some of you may use MVVM or even Viper and others. But to be true, first time that I heard about unidirectional data flow was when I started working with Redux. And basically, when you're talking about unidirectional data flow, you mean one direction of state change. So in order to do any changes in your application state, you can only do it by dispatching something called actions. And you don't work with callbacks. You don't work with, for example, you're waiting for something in a closure and then responding to a certain request or something like this. But mostly do it by using actions. And the only way to change state in your application is by using those actions, because the state is like get only for you. You can only read it. So the second thing is immutable state. And the third thing is modified by pure functions. So both of those things like somehow fight with each other. So what I mean by immutable state is you actually, in order to change something in your application, you produce a new state based on old values, and you don't change the structures, the data structure. You create a new one. And modified by pure functions is because you used something that takes an input, it returns some output, and you don't have any other variables that may change that. So it's pretty easy to test. It's really deterministic, because when you're working with Redux, you certainly know what to expect out of that. And working with this whole Redux architecture wouldn't be so great just when we look at it all alone. But Redux comes with great things, like developer tools. So at the beginning, you could actually see some of them in action. For example, a recording of the current state, or for example, time traveling. Because of the fact that all changes of the state in your applications happen because of those actions, you can actually play them back and create the same state without any problems. So those dev tools like recording, they are pretty great when you're, for example, working on something long time and you don't want to skip things. Oh, these are not used nowadays, yeah, but are great. And the time traveling is also great, because imagine that you're, for example, in your application far away in the options section, and suddenly you just went through the flow that you might want to go once again. And you just step back a few actions, and you can perform some completely different flow without any problem. And most of all, Redux was pretty fun to work with. Because of the fact that it has all those developer tools, because of the fact that it was pretty easy to come back to the project after some time, and I was surprised because because of the fact that I had those actions, I had reducers and so on. I wasn't confused, and it was easy to come back to the code base. And Redux was created by this guy. It's Dan Abramov, and he currently works in Facebook. And from what I know, he also works on React Native tooling and so on. So we might suspect that it will go pretty smoothly for us, and we're pretty lucky. So I encourage you to look him up. He does some pretty cool stuff. Yeah, so this is how I came to Redux. And later we changed the project. I was working on some other iOS project. And as you may know, when you're compiling your Swift project from clean build, you have pretty much a lot of time to think about different things, right? Yeah, I was waiting a long time, and I thought that it would be great to have those developer tools using my Swift codebase, using Swift as a language. So I Googled a bit, and I found something like ReSwift. So ReSwift, as I said before, it's pretty much Redux-like implementation of unidirectional data flow in Swift. So let's take a look at how it actually works in our application. So basically, when we are talking about ReSwift, there are 4 core elements that I think that we should know about and we should understand in order to use it properly. So the first thing is state. That's the state of your applications, of your application. There are actions that are used to change this state. There are reducers that know how to change this state based on given action. And there is store that combines it all. But let's go slowly through all of them, and I'll try to bring it closer to you. And yeah, so let's start with state. So state of application is sometimes it is pretty messy. If I ask you at some point what is the state of your current application, it wouldn't be so easy to answer this question, because you would go like, yeah, so this view model has this info, but later when you go to other component, you get info from somewhere else, and it might be pretty confusing. So Redux and ReSwift brings us something else. You have your state pretty much organized. It's actually the thing that shocked me at the beginning is that I heard that the state is global. I was like, what? Did I understand you correctly? But yeah, in fact, as a state in our application is global, and in order to not have too much rights to change it and so on, you basically should use protocols in order to somehow cut this knowledge of the state. So state is used it's basically a container for all our structures in application. And if you look at this, it's as I said, it's a structure. It has got a user, and it also has navigation state. So so our main state, our application state, looks like this. And basically, it may consist of different substates. Those substates could represent, for example, our view controllers or our components. But you could also hold like simple variables like user. Normally you wouldn't do that, but that's basically where all your knowledge about the state comes from. And that's great, because there's only one source of truth to your components. So there are no places like one component shows something opposing to something completely different to another. So we have the state, and as I previously said, there is only one way to modify this state. So let's imagine this state is an archive, like here. And in order to change it, we basically use actions. And using actions means more or less like writing a letter to a library, for example. We don't have direct access to these archives, but we can write a letter, we can add some payload there, we can give a title to it. For example, let's name it update username, and we can write a new username in our letter. We could also add some image URLs there or something else, but it's basically a letter that we fill, and we hope that somebody receives it and updates the state of our application. And what is important, in these letters, you cannot write a code that actually changes the state. It's basically only information about the payload. So here is example action. It's called update username. So as you can see, it only has one variable. It's a string. So basically, when you fill it and dispatch this action, there is nothing more that you actually know about. And mostly, you dispatch those actions, for example, when you tap on a button in your application. After this, the action is sent, and somebody will take care of that. But sometimes it's not that easy, because we have, for example, a network request. We cannot send those actions immediately. So that's why we use accountant for that. So he can also write letters for us, and that's somebody that we can ask to do some action, that to perform some work. For example, he will perform a network request on our behalf, and later prepare those letters, prepare those actions, and dispatch them. So. As I previously said, actions do not contain any code that says how to change the state. In order to do that, we have something like reducer. So you may think of reducer as this nice guy who exactly knows everything about where everything is stored. He knows about the state, and when you dispatch an action, when you send this letter, he receives it at one point, and he comes to that shelf. He takes some information out. He updates it, and it's basically your only way to change anything in your application. So he doesn't allow anybody to do any work with this state, and having this guy is really helpful. You can think of action as a reducer, of something that has input of action. It has input of state that can be optional, because we can start our application without any prior information about the state, and it produces a new state for us. So what is important here is that we do not change data in our previous structure. We create a new one, and we work with the new one. So when we dispatch this action, when we send it, then a handle action function is called. It takes this action that we have previously set, and it returns a new application state with data that comes from those reducers. As you can see, each property in our state has got its own reducer. For example, we have user reducer that will help us to deal with user updates, for example, and it looks like this. I hope that can everybody see it properly? Yeah, at the back rows, great. Okay, so we can let's imagine that we send that update username field. So we basically enter this function. If we do not give initial user, we create a new one, and then we check what kind of action was actually sent to our user reducer. So we send this update username action, and we update the name in our user, and we give back the output of a user with a new name. And I was speaking about reducers like of some kind of archivist, librarian who knows everything, but they have to know, they have to have place to live somewhere. So that's a store. And that's our place that will receive our letters. So when we send this letter, we have to send it to our store, and it will take this letter and it will give it to our reducer. And as soon as reducer comes with a new state of our application, they will call us and they will tell us that we can update our views, or we can, for example, update our analytics logs. So mostly we will subscribe to this store in our view controllers, but as I said, we can also do it in some other services that will log actions or do some other stuff for us. And store looks something like this. We initialize it with a reducer, we initialize it with a state, and we can subscribe to this store, and then we will be notified about any actions that, about any updates that happen in our state, and we can also dispatch an action on the store. So basically, if we want to take a look at how architecture looks, it's this screen. And you can see that the data flow, it goes only one way. So when we tap, for example, on the screen, we send an action, it goes to the store. The store gives a state of application to reducers that work with that and produce new state for our application. And then when they are done, they tell us that we can update our application. So basically, tapping a screen creates a moment that we can prepare this action. We send a letter, we send an action to the store. Store receives our letter, and it handles them to our archivist, to a reducer. And the reducer works with that state, and then it gives it back to the store. Store calls us, and they say that, hey, I have this new stuff that you can work with. And we can probably update the state, update our logs, and do whatever we want with that. So that's mostly how Redux architecture works, and that's how ReSwift also works. It's built on top of that. And now we come to the third section of my talk. Is what are my thoughts? What do I think of ReSwift? So, as I said, developer tools are really great. I will try to show this application once more to you. So, as you can see it, we can, without any problems, travel through our state changes. And when you get, for example, here, we can continue our application flow with different data. Let's go test. And I can simply go through the flow once more. And again, if I, for example, run the project once again, it will get back to the state that it was before. So we have a new state of our application. And this is really great because it allows us to do many different things that we are not possible to do right now. Okay, so these are those developer tools. Some of you who work with React Native may know them, and you know that it's pretty cool to have that, or somebody who worked with React. Yeah, so there are some things that you have to remember about when you're working with ReSwift or with something that is based on Redux architecture. And it's the first thing is that you have to keep your reducers fast. It's really important because reducers take old state and they produce a new one. And that means that we can't run two reducers at once and force them to work with old data, because then it will be a problem to merge new states. What if they change the same variable? So we have to be sure that reducers take care of only updating the state, and we do not perform any sorting, long sorting or something like this in them. The next thing is we can't have side effects in our reducers. For example, when we have a network request, we work with that in our action creators, and we don't want this in our reducer's code, because then something could go wrong. We don't want it to take too much time, and it could lead us to some weird places. And next thing is avoiding heavy application state. So as I said, you create a new state based on the previous one, and let's imagine that you have like hundreds of images, and you store them in an array, and that could mean that you have so much data there that creating new structure of your state would be pretty hard, because you have to copy all those things. And that's why, for example, when you're working with images, I would recommend to, for example, save only the URL of the image and cache it somewhere else, because that could bring us bring some problems. And what I also noticed that ReSwift is not for all applications, because let's imagine that we want to store, like I said, those images, or for example, a big chunk of our database is held in our structure somehow. So we should know if we should use this architecture or not. And the other thing that we should remember about is one way of changing application state. When you start working with ReSwift, with Redux architecture, you're still familiar with your old habits, like working with callbacks, and sometimes it's pretty easy for you to say something like, yeah, let's not create those actions right now, I will create them later, and when you start thinking like this, and when you start bringing this to your code base, it could result in things like you can't use these features like time traveling and recording in your application, because some of those actions could not be, for example, saved or just don't happen. You change your state in some other way. So why should I use Redux? Why should I be interested in this? And what could I learn if I start working with Redux architecture with ReSwift? So it is pretty easy to understand what is going on in your application when you use this architecture. I had situations when I, for example, needed help, and my friend came to me and he looked at this code base, and it was pretty clear what happens there. He knew that action contains some payload, something happens in the reducer, and it's always one way. There's no something like somebody asks you, so when do you change this variable? And then you start thinking, and yeah, so I actually run this function, but then it's changed during this callback, and so many things happen at once that it's pretty easy to reason about code that is written in Redux. And what I also noticed is that after coming to a project, after, for example, a month, it was pretty easy for me to get back into the right speed of coding and and understand what's going on. It is also pretty easy to test. As I said, reducers are pure functions. They get input, they produce output, they are deterministic. You just simply prepare those tests, and it's like a great pleasure to work with something like this, because it looks like it's even too easy. So I think that when somebody starts writing for example, unit tests, when he's new to coding and so on, something like this could help him to understand how it works, because you don't have to worry about some mocks and so on so much, because you could just simply work with the reducer, with actions and so on. And developer tools are also really great. I must admit that when I was working with Redux architecture in JavaScript, it was easier. It was easier because of the fact that you don't worry about serializing objects in JavaScript. It's like that's not existing topic. And in ReSwift, if you want to record actions, for example, you have to remember about serializing your objects. So that's one additional thing that you have to add to your work habit, to your work process. And at the beginning and later, for me, it wasn't pretty obvious. And sometimes I was thinking like, why do I have to do that, right? And of course, you can omit serializing, but then you just put a cross on this time travel feature, because on the recording feature, sorry, because you can't prepare a JSON file, for example, with the current state. And also fixing bugs with friends. So who doesn't like sending a long report to your friend and saying that, yeah, I have this bug in your code base, and it was, I don't know how it happened actually. I was just playing with your app and suddenly it crashed. And yeah, so you could look at that. And then you're sitting by your computer and you want to figure it out, but you actually don't know where it happened. You don't know what the state of your application was at that time. And what ReSwift enables us and what recording allows us to do is that we can basically take the JSON file with the data that was prepared in order to change this state, and you can send it to your friend. And then basically he just puts this state into his application, and he knows what happens and why. Yeah, so there aren't silver bullets, and you can't think as some. I won't be telling that ReSwift is great and it hasn't got any cons. So ReSwift and Redux can be pretty overwhelming at the beginning. Let's face it, we are used to our old habits, to our old solutions, and when we get in touch with something new, we're like, yeah, so let's leave it. We're going back to our old stuff. So at the beginning, I think there is quite a high level of going into these solutions, but I think that it's worth it. Second thing is a boilerplate code that you have to prepare in order to work with ReSwift. So, for example, as I said, if you want to serialize your actions, you sometimes have to prepare something that will make them much easier for you to save. So you have to prepare some conversion for them. And as you don't have to do it in JavaScript, in Swift it's pretty painful. And that's one of the main reasons that I think that it's not like a solution for me at most cases, but it's still pretty interesting. Second thing is that many components in ReSwift are currently in proof of concept state. So when you, for example, get into the repository of, for example, ReSwift recorder, you see that that they are still working on that. And the first time that I prepared this speech was like 5 months ago. So it is still going forward. There are improvements there, but I see that it's not going as such fast as previously, and we cannot blame anyone. It's like the guys that are working on this did a great job, and I think that if some of you are interested in that, you should totally get to that repository and, for example, add something on your side and work with that. So what I mean by also by proof of concept is like it's not like it's not working, but it's you cannot like trust it in 100%. Yeah, but it's still useful. And next thing is that it's pretty easy to get stuck when you're working with ReSwift. Because of the fact that it's new, and because of the thing that I partly dislike is that it's against the framework. So when you are working with UIKit, it just brings you some solutions like without any problems. For example, when you have a navigation bar and you add view controllers, you push them to your stack, there is like magic left arrow on top left of your screen, and you can easily get back to your previous controller. And that's great. But when you're working with Redux and when you have this navigation state, you want to change navigation state by using actions. And then you have to magically remove this arrow. Maybe you should place something that you take full control of and dispatch those navigation changes on your own. So there are some problems in this place. So these are people that I think that you should check if you want to dig deeper into ReSwift. And these are Carl Bowden, Benjamin Ench, Alexander Renslev, and Dan Abramov. You can find them on Twitter. And I've also prepared these links that I think are really worth checking. The first one comes from Carl Bowden presentation from Sydney about ReSwift. So this is a pretty cool summary of what he has told there. There's also a video uploaded by Realm about unidirectional data flow, and it's from the time where ReSwift, as I know, was at the beginnings. It was named Swift Flow back then, and there's also a repository for Redux and ReSwift. So, what are my conclusions? So I think that ReSwift is a pretty great tool. And I'm sure that I had a lot of fun when I started working with Redux architecture. It was new to me. I did something that forced me to go outside of my comfort zone because let's face it, when you are used to work with MVVM, for example, or MVC, at some point you are pretty quick with that and things go really fast. And when you start something new, it's always hard when you don't know that. So, but I think that even if you won't use it in your company projects or like bigger applications, it is still worth checking out because it will teach you to work to think in some other way than you usually do. So I think that it's really worth digging into that and checking this in order to learn something new. So thank you for your attention. I'm really glad to be here and to tell about ReSwift. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
There was a slide with Flash that you mentioned that you should keep your actions fast, but well, let's assume the pessimistic case that you have an action that you know it may take not as much that the end user may worry about, but like several hundred milliseconds. So would using Grand Central Dispatch solve this problem, or is it a bit deeper? Whether not to mix changing state with threading.
Okay, so you mean dispatching actions that could take longer time, right? So as I said, you normally would use Action Creator for that. Because if something could take some time, then for sure you don't know how long it will take, because sometimes it's pretty quick, but sometimes in pessimistic situation it will take much longer time. And still, I think that Action Creator solves this problem because you actually can, for example, dispatch it after some time, let's say, and then the action will be created by the Action Creator. So I think that's a solution for sending a direct action to the store. Does it answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes?
How do you manage with massive switch cases where you have like many actions that you have to do like...
Yeah. So basically what I do is you could previously see that here in the user reducer. Yeah, this is this user reducer with this not so massive switch, but that's a really basic example here. So normally you can see that I make changes directly here. So you would just prepare methods, but you can just put it to another classes and so on, but you still have to call them in these switch cases, and that's what I do basically. Yes?
Why this work is encapsulated in actions? This is my question.
Why?
Does action have any other role than carrying out information?
No. Basically, when you have action, it has only information about what you want to update.
So why it's called action, but it does nothing?
Yeah, that's a good question, I think. So you can see action here, for example. So you have this title, and it's
more like a container. I think that's that this code that we can see in this reducer we placed an action because this is class which knows what to do. I think.
Yes, I think that you're right. But you have this. Let's think about, for example, recording actions. So when you're using, for example, a recording store, it basically takes those actions and it replays them again. So it basically it puts them one by one to the reducer, and the state is updated. So I think that it will be pretty hard to serialize logic because normally what happens when you record your actions, you basically store them in JSON file. So then you create those actions back using this JSON file, and yeah, so they do not contain any logic. And I think that's partly the reason why. Yeah. So any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.